All right, thank you everyone for coming to our early morning session. We really appreciate all the early comers. I think we can start now, and if there's anyone else who's going to be joining us, they can come in as we go. So once again, welcome everyone. My name is Mohammed Yahia. I'm the executive editor for Nature Research in the Middle East, and our session today in Biovision is a little different from the other sessions I think that you have attended in the past couple of days, where we are looking forward to a very interactive session. So please be very open, be very forward. The whole idea of this session is to leave this room with more science communicators than we came in with. So if anyone leaves here excited about communicating science, about writing about their own science or someone else's, then it's been a great success. So just as a very quick opening remarks before I hand over to my colleague Pakinam, the main idea why we came up with this session, and the main idea why nature itself has a very strong presence in the Middle East, is that as a society in the Arabic-speaking Middle East, we have a problem with science. Namely, we don't have enough of it in our daily lives. We are also dealing with the problem of trust in science, where the public does not trust science enough, where the public is not interested in the opinion or the ideas of science as much as we hope they would be. The truth is, everything that we are going through, everything that we have right now, it's built on science, and this is the one foundation that we have for taking decisions. But the problem is that in this part of the world, and in many parts of the world, not just here, science is really rarely part of the policy-making process. On the other hand, a lot of the problems that we deal with either in Egypt or in the Arab world or around the world are fundamentally related to science. So just as a few quick examples of things that we regularly, daily talk about here. We talk about water insecurity. Everyone is worried about water scarcity. It's a huge issue, it's a huge scare, and it is something that it's an everyday topic for all Egyptians here. We talk about nuclear energy. Should we or should we not be building the first nuclear power station in Egypt? And it's a huge topic with opponents and people pro the idea. We have an ever-growing population that we need to feed. We need to think about how our agriculture has been, what we need to do. And if you look at all these issues, all these problems, they have their roots to their solutions in science. That's why we need to be talking about science more. That's why we need to have public conversations about science. We need to have more science communicators. We need to have people reaching out to society to talk about science. But that comes with a whole set of challenges, and this is a few of the things that we will be talking about today. So in order to make change, in order to create change, we need to have effective science communication. And I think on that point, it would be best to hand over to my colleague Pakinam Amer, who is the chief editor of Nature Middle East, one of our leading publications for science in the Middle East, and actually the first nature regional project dedicated to this part of the world. And Pakinam is an award-winning investigative journalist. Before joining Nature several years ago, she worked in several organizations, including Mostre Lyon. She has bylines in the Financial Times, World Politics Review, The Independent, Sunday Times, and in 2012 she won the Samir Qassar Award for investigative journalism. And for the past few years, we have been very, very lucky to tempt her to become a science journalist. So with that, I hand over to Pakinam.
You forgot to say that I'm one of your favorite people in the newsroom. I thought we agreed about
that is true as well.
Thank you so much, Mohammed. As you already know, today we're going to be handling the main question: can a society thrive in the modern world if it does not care for science? The short answer is no. Man cannot adapt and survive in a world that he or she cannot understand, because at its core, science, it explains the world. More than ever, the world needs more scientists, but not necessarily in the academic sense. We need people, humans who explore, interpret, and understand the world as scientists do. People who pursue evidence, weigh in possibilities, and search for creative solutions to the challenges that the world throws at them. We need natural scientists, humans who are scientists by nature. So how do we become natural scientists? Well, the obvious answer is we need to be observing the world more. We need to be connecting with the world and being one with it. Know that everything in this world is our business. Because science has the capacity to help us meditate, reflect, understand on the world around us. From the air that we breathe into our lungs and which helps us sustain life, to the elements, land, seas, and skies that shape the world that we inhabit, to the technology that we use to communicate every day and come together, the world around us is very much our business. So is science, the tool which essentially helps us understand the world. Without a sense of unity with that world and an awareness of how much we're part of it, we cannot be curious, we cannot innovate, we cannot invent, and we can become better people, or at least better versions of ourselves. Well, if you don't already know what, today I'm going to be sharing with you a few tips and tricks from my experience as a science journalist. As Yahia said, I run the regional edition of Nature magazine with a focus on the Arab Middle East. Nature is a multidisciplinary science magazine and journal, and I'm proud to say it's one of the best in the world. Its coverage and reach extends worldwide. But every day in the newsroom, me and my colleagues at Nature, including of course Mohammed Yahia, we deal with research, studies, graphs, numbers, jargons, what have you, technical terms, and complex methodology. And we're always at an effort to simplify it, to get creative with it, and most importantly, get comfortable with it so that we can communicate it to an audience from a wide background and from all walks of life. Basically, in doing so, we had to familiarize ourselves with the scientific process. And every day, we fall in love with science for what it has to offer to us in the world and what it tells us about ourselves, all over again. So, we've collected a few tips along the way that I'd like to share with you, and hopefully, it can help you get closer to science and make it a part of your thinking and the way that you look at everything. So, the first tip for me is stay curious, like a child, and remember to be inquisitive. So, the way I think about it is that there is one thing that we need to keep from our childhood and hold on to, which is curiosity. The desire to prod, probe, experiment, and learn. And one thing that you have to remind yourself of every single day and force onto yourself is the need for scrutiny and inquisitions. Because we get comfortable, but we need to be asking questions. We need to continue to scrutinize the answers that we get as well. From observation, or rather in the amorphous, mysterious ways that we become aware of, what plagues our society or the problems with our society, I have realized that some in Egypt, perhaps in other places in the Arab world too, believe that it's not okay to ask too many questions, that you should be keeping a low profile, تمشي جنب الحيط, and accept the status quo, not ask why or how. Some attribute this to tradition and even religion. But I have a different view. I personally believe that if you leave these biases aside, you realize that both tradition, our heritage, and religion encourage inquisition and asking questions. If you look at the Quran or Christianity, they often push us to meditate upon nature, look for signs in ourselves and the universe, to read and even doubt. So I think that whatever barriers we think lies between us and the pursuit of knowledge is mostly imagined. Most importantly, we need to change the way we speak about science. It's very simple. We need to get comfortable with it. And that won't happen until we internalize these three rules, if you will, or statements. One is that access to knowledge is not a privilege, it is a right. Two, it's not exclusive to a small elite. And three, it's something we talk about to our friends, family, and neighbors. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Star Wars, but this is Yoda, the Jedi Master, the most famous one. Science you must not fear, and this is actually the way Yoda would say it. I know it's easy to fear science and its experts, with its big terms and jargon, and I know that over the years as well, even here as someone who's been educated in Egypt, we've been made, some people, some of my own teachers even, made the mistake of portraying science as an Olympian mountain, or say a Jedi order, something that is high and aloof, and that, it's unattainable except for a few, people who are geniuses or with a certain IQ, not mortals like us, or, people with a few midichlorians in their blood. So, as someone who hadn't graduated from a science school, but communicates science nowadays every day to audiences, I can assure you that science not only affects every single aspect of your life, but it's very much your business. It's certainly not the business or the realm of the few, but of the many. It begins with finding the courage to brave this territory, to ask, to research, and never ever shy away from reaching out to the science community, to the experts, to the teachers. Not from a place of ignorance, but with a sense of entitlement, because you are entitled to knowledge. In short, going geek. Embrace your inner nerd. We are in a world these days where nerds reign supreme. I think we should celebrate that. We should geek out, nerd out, and I guess this is your chance. So, one of the ways in which we can become better scientists by nature, or become people who are interested in science, is that we need to embrace a multidisciplinary mindset. We need to bridge the divide between natural sciences and humanities, between culture and research, between society and science. Because even in the way we speak about it, we need to understand that the disciplines are all one. For instance, science answers certain questions, but cannot answer others. As the famous meme, science can tell you how to clone a Tyrannosaurus Rex, but humanities can tell you that this might be a bad idea. I'm going to talk now about how this sort of bridging the divide is already happening in some countries all across the Arab world. A great model, in my opinion, is the Imagine Science Film Festival, which annually brings together filmmakers and scientists, artists and engineers, students and teachers, people old and young in Abu Dhabi every year. This is actually a picture from one of the films that were showcased in Imagine Science a few years back. And basically, it's every single year, young people and old people come together to celebrate art and installations and movies that reflect on science and society. And I think, in my opinion, that they're slowly shattering this wall. That every year they're destroying this wall between art and science every time they talk about the issues at their intersection. It's happening in labs. The use of 3D architecture and digital visualizations in labs and research across the Arab world. It's happening in Saudi Arabia, in Qatar, in the United Arab Emirates. And it's a point where technicians, photographers, members of the creative industry, as well as scientists meet, creating aesthetically pleasing visualizations, say, of the human body, of the brain, of rains and winds, of space objects, of ancient rivers or chambers hidden inside the pyramids or temples for the purpose of research, to serve research. VR. The people working in VR incubators in particular come from all backgrounds: journalism, research, filmmaking, engineering, what have you. These people break the barriers between disciplines every single day. Now, VR is not just fun and games, but now scientists are exploring it as a tool and a vehicle, as an artistic and immersive tool in which they can communicate the research or the pressing issues related to science. I personally had an extremely immersive and moving VR experience in Abu Dhabi this year. I told you, Yahia, about it. And during that experience, for 10 minutes, I was a seed inside the earth that began sprouting out of the soil, grew into a shrub, on and on, until I became, in that artificial world, a rainforest tree that sadly and eventually perished. I experienced that growth from a seedling into a tree in its fullest form and witnessed its fate firsthand. It was impressive and beautiful, and I never personally felt so intimately connected to the rainforest as I did during those moments in that VR experience. And I was so devastated when I witnessed the kind of destruction that rainforest endured firsthand. The installation called Tree was part of an initiative to raise awareness about forests, which are our best defense against climate change and deforestation, which, as you well know, releases a staggering amount of carbon into the atmosphere. Finally, if you're already a scientist, I urge you to start communicating your own research, and not in jargon, but in simple terms that people all over can understand. Scientists must become communicators, storytellers, filmmakers, and visual artists. I need you to look at the people who have been communicating science effectively, whether on TV, on YouTube, and social media, and take note of their methods and techniques, the ease in which they break down the science and talk about it. Experiment with your friends. Try talking about your research with your kids and see what kind of questions they ask. I'm not asking you to pack your bags and move to Hollywood and learn filmmaking there or take an art residency in Florence, but to simply use the tools that you already use every day: your phone, social media, your wit, your humor, your ability to tell stories, your anecdotes, to talk about work, take pictures of your lab work, show it to others, talk about the big picture and create interest in it, talk and simplify and draw analogies. Talk with the people and not down to them. Whether it's exoplanets or bacteriophages or fossils that you're studying, talk about it not in numbers and in jargon, but tell it like a story. Because at the end, like laymen, you too are human with concerns, fears, questions, and aspirations, and like them, you can understand that at the heart of the matter, science is about what matters. If you find what matters to the people around you, you'll know how to keep their attention and make them fall in love with science as you once have. Thank you very much, and now my colleague Mohammed Yahia will take over.
Thank you, Pakinam. All right, so just to follow up on where Pakinam ended. So let's see. So there's a need for science journalism, if you would say, in our modern world. In this time and age, our world is ruled by science. This is what we have now. There were times that when things were different, but what we have now, everything is led by science. And this created this need for us to communicate and talk about science and make it more accessible to other people as well. So we're publishing more science than we've ever done before as humans. The amount of science we're producing is growing at an exponential rate. There's a new paper published every 20 seconds right now. While this is great, more science is very nice, but until we communicate that new science, there's a missing link here. There's a missing opportunity that we should be able to capitalize on, because if it's not communicated, it's not really complete. So what is science communication? What are we trying to do? It's the art of telling people about science with just a few little pieces. How many people here have been to previous biovisions? All right, good number of people. Let me give you a very simple example. If you would remember the opening of previous biovisions, there was usually an hour-long presentation by Dr. Salahuddin, who is right here. And if you remember that, it was quite long, 1 hour long, but I was always fascinated by it. It was a very communicative way to tell people about science. It always got me excited. I left that room on that day excited about so many potential things, excited about the future, excited about what science can do to us. And what always struck me was how accessible it is. It was a lot of science, a lot of dense science, but it was presented in a very accessible way. And what's really also important is that while we are communicating science, we do so correctly and accurately, because bad communication of science is just as bad as not communicating it. It can create problems, and the main problem it can create is distrust in science. If people distrust science, then we've lost, and that's where a lot of the problems arise. And the third thing is to communicate science in a way that is relevant to your audience, and the audiences are very different. Your audience could be 8-year-old kids, it could be an educated science community, and it could be farmers, it could be the layperson, it could be something on TV. Depending on the audience, it will change a lot how you communicate the science, what do people want to know, what is relevant to them. So that's also one thing to keep in mind when you're communicating science. And there's so many different ways that you can be doing this. Science journalism, what we do through nature, it's just one form of that. But there are so many different things you can be doing. There are science festivals, there are museums, there are science centers, there are school lectures, and all of these, we can't depend on one way to communicate science. We need to bring all these things together in a holistic way to actually be able to bring change to a community, to bring change to society, because we need to address all the different aspects. You can't just address one of these. But people are always coming up with new ways and more innovative ways, and they're always thinking about how to use these new tools. So for example, science blogs and videos and podcasts, they're becoming an extremely powerful and important platform to communicate science right now. Science videos on YouTube, they get millions of hits because people care, and it's really interesting when it's done nicely. So why do we need more of it? Because there's so much wrong science out there, and it comes from everywhere. We have to deal with the anti-vaccine movement, for example. It's powerful. The current president in 2014 actually tweeted that vaccines can cause autism, and you would find that this has been retweeted over 13,000 times. We have our own set of problems here. You might remember this from a few years back, and this was a huge issue. This was a huge disaster where miscommunication of science created this huge societal problem where people were actually waiting for a cure that does not exist. That is a failure of science communication. Science communicators at that time were not able to properly communicate science. We had science news in prominent newspapers telling us that this was real. There's global warming and climate change, and this is a huge issue, and there's so many people out there denying climate change exists when thousands and thousands and thousands of researchers have proven almost beyond a doubt that it is there. But then people are they can nitpick and deny it and attack it, which is exactly what was happening several years ago with the tobacco industry as well. So, in short, there is a war on science. There is a war on science that's happening. There are people who deny climate change, there are people who deny evolution, there are people who deny the moon landing and vaccinations, and there are people that attack genetically modified food and say that it will kill you. When science can tell us that all of this is wrong, but who will listen, who will believe, who will be able to stand up for science and communicate proper science effectively to people to counter all the negative messaging that they keep receiving from everywhere. There need to be champions of science. So this, I call this the gradient model, and somewhere you've got the science, which is being done by the scientists, and they're a very isolated community. They like talking to each other. They really enjoy it. It makes a lot of sense to them. It's very easy. They talk to people who are like-minded. They agree with what they're doing. And then there's the public that is not really aware of what the science is saying, what's the latest science on any one topic. And they don't really understand how science itself works as well. So they look at science as this, I mean, the nature of science is that it's ever evolving, but sometimes the public would communicate that it is wrong, that it is full of mistakes. And in the middle, you need science communicators that can bridge this gap and do this through two different methods. One way is to improve the communication skills of scientists. We need scientists to be able to go out there and talk about their work and about science in general, and then also increase the science literacy of the public itself. And once you are able to do both of those, you will bring these two very different camps closer together and create areas where they can overlap and communicate. And that is why I think it's really important to bring science home. It's not just about communicating science, bring it home. So the role of the science communicator is quite simply to be a critical analyst who is able to understand the science, digest it, and then explain it to other people. And they need to be a critical analyst because the truth is there is a lot of bad science out there. There is a lot of misleading science out there. And it is the role of the science communicator to be able to sift through that and protect the society from having to do this job of looking at what is right and what is wrong. So you cannot just be yes, we are champions of science, but we are champions of proper science, and there's a lot of improper science being done out there. So the science communicator needs to understand their audience. In particular, that's the first step. They need to understand who they're talking to and what they need. Like I said, are they children? Are they older people? Did you need to explain your science to your grandmother? Every one of those is a very different audience. And they need to understand the science itself, because if you don't understand it, you will not be able to explain it. Finally, you need to simplify the science, because this is what people want to do. And simplifying is not dumbing it down. This is always the problem that a lot of scientists feel, that if they start simplifying their science, it will be dumbing it down. But that's not what you need to do. What you need to do is find a common language with people. So here's two cartoons that kind of drive that point home. On the right, you've got this old lady asking a scientist about the time, and this is the answer he gives her. Simply just wanted to know the time, so she just answers, you mean you don't know the time, and that's it, because the answer is completely unrelated to the question that she was asking in her own view. This is also an example of where we stand, where you have the scientist community and the public, and they're talking two completely different languages, and you need to find a common language. This is why scientists need to do a little bit more work to be able to find a common language that is relevant to the public, to the community, to the society that they are part of, that funds the research, and that is, at the end of the day, affected by the work and research that they do. So you can't be talking about apples and oranges. You need to find something in common. You need to find a common ground. Finally, on the bringing home point, I think that children is one of the most underappreciated areas where we can be doing real change. Children by nature, they are scientists. They're born scientists. They're very inquisitive. Sadly, we kill this in them. But keep children inquisitive. Excite them about science. Let them do these things. Just look at this picture. That the children get so excited when they see something like that. It's huge. It can be life-changing. Neil deGrasse once said that he had this point that he said, if you're in a place with children, try leaving a pair of binoculars on the table and just wait, just leave it there. And I've tried that with my daughter, and I've left a pair of binoculars there, and on that same night, I found her looking at the moon with those binoculars. And this is huge. This is something. She was inquisitive enough to actually look at the moon, and she started asking questions about what she's seeing. And this is what we need to do. We need to think about children. We need to think about how to keep this inquisitiveness going, not to kill it, and how to capitalize on that, because they are the most receptible people, most receptible group to an appreciation of science. And you can change people's lives with something really, really small. Just get someone excited about science at a younger age, and you never know, maybe they'll be the next Nobel laureate. With that, I'll end with my last slide, which is this quote from Mark Pulford, who was a science advisor to in the UK, who said that science is not finished until it is communicated. You cannot just conduct science. You need, at the end, the last step of that is to communicate it to people, to get people to appreciate it, to be involved in it, to be part of it. We cannot have two independent communities really that do not work together or cross over. And I'll end with that, and thank you, and we'll be open for some questions, but I'll also love to ask you some questions as well, so I hope you'd be open to that. Thank you. Can we maybe get the lights, please?
Mohammed,
Yes, please.
Ron LaPorte from Pittsburgh. First of all, I'd like to thank you very much for your help with nature and Dr. Segway, the problems that they have with nature. There's three things I was thinking about as you're talking. I think basically part of the problem of science communication, in a way, you're still using archaic models. And for example, there's three areas that I've seen on the web that I think are hugely important. The first is, in order to get people to learn about science, they've got to be interested in science. I mean, that's an obvious thing. And what we've been looking at and that I've not seen in the media, are what we call just-in-time lectures, so that immediately after a disaster occurs, what you see, if you look at Google Trends, you see a spike upward for 5 days and a spike downward for 5 days. So you got to get into that in the first. And the only people there for the first 5 days are the media, government, and nobody believes them. But basically, you be able to work with the scientists who are really very interested in communicating, but are not very good at that, and basically jump in on that, because then you reach so many people across the board. The second is the two models that I like on the web is, I don't know if you've seen Curiosity.com. Curiosity.com is a great system that looks at different questions related to science, and it's really interesting. Every day, they give you 5 things every day, and some of them are slightly bizarre, but it's so fascinating in terms of grabbing your interest as part of that. And the third thing is, there's one, because we study education all the time, I don't know if you've seen the crash courses. There's crash courses for epidemiology, crash courses for physics, crash courses, where it's a very entertaining approach for understanding the simple concepts in these areas. And I went through things like, I don't know anything about molecular biology, but it brings it down to a level, but it still needs polishing from you guys. But it's a wonderful model for investigation, because again, capturing the interest up front is really, as I view, is one of the central factors. And I don't think the media, I don't think scientists have done that very well. And I think you guys can do that in terms of getting that interest going.
No, I was just going to say, I completely agree, especially when we're talking about how sometimes we let the media and we let people who are not experts talk first, and then we come in only for damage control to correct what has already been said. So I totally agree with this. And in another angle as well, and that's what we try to do in the newsroom, is we try to adapt quickly to new technologies and, to people's attention as well, and what takes their attention and what makes them, and what keeps their attention. Because, I mean, funny enough, we write about science and technology, but I've seen that a lot of, especially highbrow science venues, like science news venues, are very slow to adapt to new technology. I mean, and they're always reacting when mainstream media jumps on it first, and we need to be the people at the advent of these kind of technologies. We need to fascinate the people and show them that, we can talk to them, and not, like I said in my speech, not talk down to them, and not, and like Mohammed said, that we're not speaking different languages, but that we're trying to reach them as well and hear from them in very different ways, including using new technologies. So I completely agree with you.
Just one more point on that, because I think the approach is, what we've done is we've created a huge network of scientists. And within, if we send something out, if there's a earthquake in Peru, you can reach the scientists in Peru who know about this rather than running around trying to find contacts. And if you created a network of scientists on all different disciplines, then you can very rapidly bang and get it out, because you got to get it out within the first day. And then the news, newscasters are presenting, and they're presenting it all wrong, and they're getting the good science out quickly. So I think you're doing a great job.
Yeah, and I think that science news media should sort of be part of that as well and point people in the right direction, because there are a lot of scientists who are using social media to try and communicate the good science, but not enough spotlight is put on them, especially in these critical moments. So I think that we need to be taking a more proactive role and a more sort of on the ground. Like, we need to get out there and talk to people and point them in the right direction. So thank you for your intervention. I completely agree.
Just to very quickly add to that, I think social media is a very powerful tool to solve a lot of these problems, because everyone can be their own direct science communicator. There are no gatekeepers as there were with publishers. In the past, if, for example, if you want to write for Nature, you'd have to go through us. But with social media, you can just go ahead. You can be the person on the ground, be the person who's reporting first, and then news outlets would go to you because you're there, right? I mean, like that example. If a volcano happens somewhere, you need the scientists on the ground. They're the most useful person that you'd want to talk to at that time. So social media is a powerful tool. And it just breaks all those barriers that people had in the past to communicate science.
Thank you very much for this fascinating session and excellent presentation. But I think that we have really 3 or 4 very different kinds of enemies to fight. We, being those who believe in science and on the basis of science, wanted to communicate the best available knowledge to the public at large. There are those who basically are anti-science and science deniers generally, like Mr. Trump when he says that climate change is a hoax, it doesn't exist, and so on and so forth, despite whatever the scientists say. And there, I think the only way is just to keep hammering away. The same is equally true of certain things like, but not quite the same, but certain things like anti-GMO. The scientific evidence from all the studies done by all the academies, by all the very authoritative groups, are that there is no unique risk in how the genes got, whether it was natural mutation, whether it was conventional breeding, whether it was by bombarding it with radioactivity, or whether it was by actually taking a transgene and inserting it or deleting it. And but the attacks continue. And there, the issue is not so much whether it's true or not true, it's going to be a public attitude. And the public attitude, like fashions, like certain foods, I like food medames, for example, in Egypt. That's it's something you like. And when people say this is crazy, I remind United States people that there was a similar campaign some time ago about taking care of food safety through irradiation. But the very word irradiation scared people into thinking that it would be radioactive, which has nothing to do with it, but that's another. But actually, it was never adopted. It was never adopted. So you have a situation whether the issue is to get the facts out or it is to get adoption of particular activities outside. Third part is there is a general tendency in the press and the media to want exciting stories. So, for example, when you hear that, my God, we've been able, this particular thing increases your chances of getting this disease by 50%. Well, what's the original base? If it is 0.05 of 1%, and I increase it by 50%, it becomes 0.075 of 1%, which is not very impressive, but it scares people at the beginning. And from that, a lot of people sell diets and so on. So I think that there has to be, in our response, the way you've said it, and I like very much for us to embrace the inner nerd and the geek within us, but that we have to communicate at different levels. One is just general cultural approach. When I say in Egypt, I've talked at the Supreme Council for Culture, scientific culture is not about knowing Avogadro's number and the latest quantum equations. It is about your approach to a problem, your willingness to look at evidence, your willingness to rationally argue a case, and that's part of general culture. And we have a role in that, and learned societies, academies, etc., have a role in that. And then there is a better understanding of the issues of life, and there I think the science of life becomes very important, and you have a role to play. And finally, debunking the lies is a separate activity, and it should not take up all of our time. At least that's an impression, so I very much welcome your comment on that three-way split of our efforts.
Thank you very much for that, Dr. Sarakuddin. I think you hit the nail on the head here with something that's maybe it's probably the most challenging part, which in 2017 the term fake news has become quite popular, but it's been in science much longer than that. So we've had to deal with these issues for so long, from the anti-vaccination movements, which are still alive now, to flat earthers, which are increasing, and these are issues. These are very real issues that we have to deal with. And the problem is that, which is also driven by the increase in social media, is the cult mentality, where we get surrounded by people who think the same way, and in doing so, this reinforces certain beliefs that may not be based on science. So if you are a parent who is opposed to vaccinating your children, you might see this tweet from Donald Trump, and that would reinforce your opinion. Where if you could see a lot of research, people saying that it is not related to autism, you'll just discard it. And this like-mindedness or cult mentality creates an uphill battle that science communicators have to fight through. I think this is the same problem that people deal with with everything. It's not just about science. It's in culture, politics, everything really. You have to deal with this issue of like-minded people coming together and shunning any other or different ideas. But I always see this as an uphill battle for science communicators. We don't really have another option. So you can keep at it. And like I said, I mean, if we leave this room with more science communicators than came in, then it's a win, because you start to increase the voices that are actually speaking for science, that are champions of science. And once you start to create this effect, you can start bit by bit driving out other voices who are at war with science, things like basically science deniers, or people who are culturally opposed to certain parts of science.
Actually, speaking of the whole idea of the war on science, I wanted to comment with something that I just remembered right now. In 2016, the GSS survey ran by the University of Chicago, they surveyed people about how much they trust science as opposed to other institutions. And I think the results were staggering because it turned out that people actually trusted science more than they trusted Congress, more than they trusted the executive branch or the press, companies, banks, even organized religion. And the question at the time, it was shocking because everyone thought, that people trust science less, that there is an actual war on science per se. But a lot of people found that, no, people trust evidence and trust scientists, but there is a problem, that there is a rift between what scientists actually believe or think versus what people believe or think. And this is, I think, this is where science communicators come in, and this is why there is an urgent, this spells out the urgent need for science communicators, because like right now, we're the only people, the burden falls on us to fill this gap between what people believe in versus what the scientists believe in. So I think it's like the people, for instance, who believe that vaccines are wrong or that they lead to autism, I don't think that they're engaged in a war per se on scientists, but that they don't know any better, that they are convinced with, the hearsay and the anecdotes that they hear from friends more than, because maybe they're not hearing enough from scientists, maybe scientists are talking more to each other and not to them, and maybe it's where, science communicators should come in and sort of connect the two sides together. So this just came, this is just an afterthought regarding, what you said about, the rift and the misconceptions. And maybe we need to even look at the war on science as we term it differently, that maybe it's not a war after all, but a very big misunderstanding.
Can we maybe take a question here in the
Hello. I'm very passionate about science communication, and I have been in this field about 2 years ago. But the problem in Egypt, especially, that there is no specialization in that field. That means I have a talent to communicate with people, and I have a small knowledge, I can do it. There is no courses, there is no trainings for that. And the other problem that anyone can do that. If, for example, I study biology, but I can communicate in physics. Even I don't have a basic of physics. That we have a bad image about science communication, something easy. Just I read a paper about physics, I understand it, I can communicate with people. That we need some specialization in that field and training and so on. So we need more focus in that field, especially we have a lot of bad theories or wrong theories about science. Science is complicated and so on. And if you know about Egyptian Science Week in Egypt, it's something very good. I volunteered in it, so to make Egypt speak science. But we need more focus about how to train people to make science communication and be in that field in the right way, because it became a trend in Egypt, if you hear about it. So anyone can do that without any specialization, without any basic knowledge of the field, of even the science communication field. So we need more focus about the undergrad student, even high school student, but we need some trainings and courses available for them to make more specialized, not just a talent. That's it. Thank you.
I think that until this happens, you need to learn your own ways of, like you said, by experimenting with your friends, with your colleagues who are not necessarily specialized in science, with your family. And it needs to happen in an organic way, because science communication is a very modern term right now. It's very trendy, but it hasn't always existed, the term as we know it now. But science communicators have been around for centuries. I mean, Einstein is a great science communicator, and the word science communicator was not, it's just he was a person who knew how to speak about his science, but not just out of talent, I think it was also out of passion. So the more passionate you are about the sciences, and the more eager you are to sort of speak to people about it and tell them about the kind of work that you do without speaking down to them, the easier it will come. I mean, it's an exercise, it's something that you have. I mean, training is important, yes, if you want to take a career path in science communication, And that is something that you can do for now through online courses, for instance. Maybe look through Coursera. Yesterday in the higher education session, we talked about, you know, how there are so many venues for learning now that are outside of the mainstream. You know, like I said, online courses like EDX, like Coursera, where you can learn about, where you can take free courses and where you can, you know, ask questions of experts. So there are ways to do it right now, even if it's not through formal scholarship. But the most important thing is exercise. It doesn't matter how many courses you take and how many trainings you take. If you don't have the passion for it and if you don't have the drive for it, it won't happen. And I think the best way is to start with your colleagues, to start with your family, to start with your, you know, close circle. And I think, like, and this is what I've observed even as a student back in the AUC. Like, I used to major in physics and then I moved to journalism. And I remember that students boasted about the fact that they can talk in terms that other people cannot understand. And they used to laugh at other people, and it was like sort of, oh, no, يا ابني انت مش هتفهم ده or whatever. And that it's a source of pride that they know jargon that other people don't know. And I thought that was like, now I think about it in retrospect, and I think this is exactly where the divide has started. It has started back then when we started thinking that as physicists or chemists or, you know, biologists, that we know better just because we know the jargon, and this is not the case whatsoever. And I think we need to realize that, you know, the access to knowledge is not exclusive to us, and we should be more willing to share it with people.
You're absolutely right. There is no formal science communication education available in Egypt or in almost any other Arab state. One resource I would personally point you to is the World Federation of Science Journalists. They have an online course, which is very good. I think it's an excellent place to start if you're interested in science communication. I may be a bit biased, but it is an excellent resource.
Mohammed happens to be the president of the World Federation of Science Journalists, and he's the second president, like the second Egyptian president in the history of their organization. So if you're actually interested in that, this is the person to talk to. I think he's too humble to say it straight out, but you know.
But yes, I think it's an excellent resource. And like Pakinam said, I mean, if there's no formal education, then you do with what you have. Really, that's the only option you have. And you're right. A lot of people communicate about science without formal education in this particular branch of science, which I think that if you, with enough research, it's absolutely fine. We will never be experts in every single branch of science. I don't know every single branch of science, but I would often report on things that are not my familiar territory. But I would do a lot of research before I start doing that. I would really do a lot of research before I feel confident enough to start writing about it or communicating it. So yes, I think you just have to make with what you have. And Egypt Science Week, I think it's a wonderful initiative. The only problem is this 1 week, right? It's this 1 week when everyone is excited about science, and the turn-up is huge. People are really interested in science. Thousands of people go to that. But what we need for proper science communication is something ongoing. It doesn't have to be every single day, but we need to have more of these science festivals. We need to have more museums. We need to have a natural sciences museum. These kind of things make a huge difference, I think. Do you still have a question here? Yes, please.
I would like, sort of emphasize what had been said on trying to offer training to people to communicate science. It's interesting, sort of that you expect that people, sort of coming to a session like this and leave the room being, sort of a science communicator. Definitely not. This is, sort of needs a lot of effort. And as Ms. Pakinam, sort of said at the beginning, you need to educate the scientists how to communicate, sort of, and how to sharpen their skills in communicating, sort of their science. I claim that I am a science communicator, and I have a lot of books, sort of written on simplifying science. I could tell you, sort of a lot of negative stories how in order to go to communicate and in order to go to publish and in order to go to the media, it is not that straightforward. I have been approached by a television program, and they told me we want, sort of to start a program of Dr. Mustafa Mahmoud. I told them with all the respect to Dr. Mustafa Mahmoud, I don't take, sort of the religious path in interpreting science and looking into science. And after I went to Madinat al-Intaj al-Alami and a lot of things, the new channel was launched, and there was not a program on science in it. And when I looked at the programs of science, I thought that they fired the lady, sort of, who talked to me about having a science program. We don't have here, and again, sort of, we are not talking probably worldwide and, well, in this international conference, but I'm coming back, sort of, to the region we don't have science communication. We don't have science communication in journalism, apart from very few, sort of specialized, probably, journals. We look at Al-Ahram, Al-Akhbar, and that sort of thing. And as you said, having, sort of wrong or miscommunication of science is not as bad as not saying it's even worse, because it needs a lot of remedies, sort of afterwards. You need to train the scientists to communicate, sort of their science. For example, I tell you, a lot of my colleagues might, sort of look at me and said, instead of, sort of investing your time in writing an article in Majallat al-Ilm, that sort of thing, why don't you write a new scientific paper? They are right, because actually at the end I'm promoted on these scientific papers. I'm not promoted in communicating science. The whole thing need to have, sort of a different investigation and a different outlook. Thank you.
No, I was actually wondering, because you said that you wrote books on simplifying science. What do you think is the most important thing that scientists need to learn or to do in order to be able to communicate their work better or their science better?
I tell you a story, for example, sort of a book. I was, sort of talking to my son about television, and he was asked when he was young to write a report, sort of on television to his school. And we were talking, sort of, and in the middle of the talk, I told him, at your age, we didn't have a television at home. And he looked at me surprised and, sort of said, how come you make, sort of that social move from not having a television on, and then now we... So I told him, in Egypt, there was no television in Egypt. And he asked me a very straightforward, simple question. How did you live then? He couldn't believe that life could, sort of go on without television. I took the title of that question, and I wrote a book which was published by Al-Ahram on the history and the communication and how we, used to communicate by light and by signals and by sort of things until now. I have seen here in the Library of Alexandria, and there was a session headed by Professor Sarabuddin on somebody communicating by putting a chip, sort of in his hand. So I went the whole journey through. That was, sort of very well received book. This is one of the examples, sort of, I'm trying to make a story of the science, how it affected our life through over.
I think you're right on point here, and I think it's great that what you did was ask someone else what they needed to know about and then responded to that. And I think this is what scientists should do more, is that, you know, instead of just answering questions about science, ask the public what they need to know, what they're interested in, what they're concerned about, and then take it from there. So yeah, I think, I mean, this is a great tip. Thank you.
Let me first agree with you that television is it's the most powerful news outlet that we have in Egypt. So without breaking into television, it's pretty much a lost fight. And television is not interested in science. That's the truth of it. They don't care. I don't think there are many science shows. What is there is of very abysmal quality. So yes, it's something that we need to think a lot of. One example that comes to mind, unfortunately, is with during the kofta treatment machine, and a lot of well, not a lot of us, but a few of us who were writing about this online were very vocal against the treatment. But then they would bring someone on TV who's wearing a lab coat, and they would say that this works, and it would completely eradicate anything that we've done. It is so powerful that people would call me up and tell me, what would you know? This person on TV who is wearing a lab coat said that this works. So yes, TV is powerful.
And I love how they're interested in theatrics. They always make people wear lab coats, even if they're children showcasing their, you know, their inventions. They just make them wear lab coats.
Lab coats make
to
a
give
huge
them
difference.
legitimacy, like he's wearing a lab coat, so he must know what he's talking about.
We were planning to wear lab coats today, but
Yeah.
yeah,
Actually, this could definitely.
Just to comment on the other points you made, and I think that yes, I don't think anyone will walk out of here as a full-fledged science communicator, but it's really the start of it. It's exactly like that example I gave when I left those binoculars, and my daughter went to school the next day, and she was trying to explain to her friends that there were little holes in the moon, and why there was a dark spot, which is stuff that she asked me after she started looking at it. So it's the same here. If people can walk out of here interested in talking about art, about others, just to their families, about their research, that can make a bit of difference, I think. Yes, please.
Thank you for your talk about this session, because I'm involved in agriculture communication, particularly because I'm professor in the faculty of agriculture and graduated from Alexandria from 50 years ago. Now, the title faculty of agriculture, and we have department for horticulture. That means specifically for agriculture, mean the end user will be the farmer. From many years ago, from the ancient Egyptians, how we can communicate with these farmers. We have department established here, Faculty of Agriculture of Alexandria from 50 years ago, is agriculture extension, which interesting how to communicate with these people in the land. Now the problem, we have to classify between science, technology, and art. The agriculture, it is an art, not a science. Now, for example, biotechnology, it is an art, not science. The question is how we can communicate through an art, not in science. And the interesting question for me is, for the future, how we can communicate with robotic farms. This is my question. Thank you.
I think I'll answer the part that relates to how do we see it, how do we see science as an art, and I think it begins with, like I said before, with trying in our heads to dissolve that barrier between the disciplines. I mean, the entire world is now heading towards interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary work, so I think one way is what I showcased here is how people are using different ways to communicate their own research. Like I said, VR, for instance, artificial reality and virtual reality. I mean, you can use that. I can imagine it happening in agriculture in so many ways in order to make people see what's happening, you know, within the soil and outside, and you know, the kind of fertilizers that are being used, the kind of technologies, even the use of robotics in agriculture to make them visualize how it's all happening. You can also use 3D visualization. So there are ways and there are technologies, and right now I think, yes, they are expensive, so that's why they're not widely adopted by, say, universities or institutions. But I think there is also a very simple way of doing it. I met a scientist at Imagine Science Film Festival this year who simply took photos of, she was a biologist, and she took photos of what she saw under the microscope, and she enhanced the colors and, you know, like photoshopped it a bit to make it more interesting visually, and she blew it up, you know, and put it in installations and art installations, and it looks amazing, and it created an interest in the work that she's doing, and it was a sort of a backdoor to talk more about her research. And so she used art as a way to grab attention for the kind of research she was doing. So at the beginning, people were just looking at something that is beautiful, aesthetically pleasing, but then the questions sort of, you know, develop into, you know, so what is this related to? How is this different? What is surprising about this? And, you know, bit by bit, she started talking and delving into the heart of her research. So I'm not sure if this is what you meant by using art to communicate, but I can imagine the same thing being done in agriculture. And I think already in KAUST, for instance, they're already using visualization techniques in agriculture. And it looks amazing, but for someone who's not a scientist, for me, it is a form of art. Just looking at it, it's very fascinating. And I think this is one way in which you can make your science interesting, is to make it more and more visual.
Communication to farmers part, and from my personal experience, I think that the most powerful way to communicate with farmers is to accept and respect that they are experts, that they need to be very involved in whatever the message that you are bringing to them. They know things intrinsically. They may not know the science behind it, but they need to be partners for anything that is, for any science that you are trying to apply or science that you are trying to bring to them. And that extends to other groups as well, but farmers are a very prominent group, and that's one of the things I was talking about when I say know your audience, because the different audiences, they have different needs of how to communicate science to them.
I think it's an excellent point. I mean, because you were talking about robotics, for instance, and how it can help in agriculture. And like what came to my mind is, you know, my own family. I hail from a family of falahin, and basically, you know, falahin are very proud. You know, it's not, you can't come to them and tell them that this is going to take over your work, or you can't talk down to them, because like you said, they're the experts. And I think that it's a mix of science communication and, you know, and respecting expertise, like you said. And you have to communicate to them how this will help them, but also listen to them and see, you know, what they have to contribute. And I think this is the key to communicating with anyone, really, and trying to get them engaged and trying to get them to, you know, accept and adopt new technology. And I really hope that answers your question. But yeah, I think the first step is to communicate with the people who are doing it right now and try to make them excited about what you're offering them and not making them feel that it's going to replace them or it's going to undermine them in any way.
I know there are a few questions here, but if you just take a quick minute, I have a question. Who here is doing research? All right. Can you tell us about your research? Very briefly, tell us the research that you're involved in.
I also wanted to ask a question first. Maybe I should ask you first before, and then I tell you. Because I've been waiting for this moment. Now you change the. Unless you promise that I'll have the.
I can promise you that, yes.
Okay, so what's your question?
Tell us about the research that you're doing.
I'm doing research about open data and how we can use this open data to and open science to advance sustainable development.
Okay, now tell a 13-year-old about your research in a tweet.
I'll simply put it this way. It's by being transparent about our observation and how we connect it in a more meaningful way to better our lives is what I'm trying to do.
Okay, I like the 13-year-old version more.
But see the difference, because even as a person in science journalism, I would have followed with the question of what is open data? I don't even understand what this means in the context of your research.
But you know, Twitter has only characters that you have to use, and that's why I had to ensure that at least the core part of what I needed to communicate is observation that is broad. That's what science is all about. And every observation you must pick the parameters that you measure. So that's the data now. Now, if that's a question the child should ask after I've said it, and then for what purpose? You know, to better our life, to improve. I think this is what sustainable is all about. So,
So I owe you a question, sir.
I hope I've got something. All right, thank you very much. Having said that, I'll connect what you asked to what I was thinking about. There is open science movements, I would call it. As we are now in a time when Europe, and now even Africa, we all now say open science is the way to go. And some kind of strategy, I'm very interested to see whether it connects with bringing science home. And you are advocates of bringing science home. Sitting on where you sit, nature is at the top of science application. Could you kindly comment how you view this movement as to whether it is actually going to bring science home? Because me, as an African scientist, one of those who are tasked with coming up with an open science strategy for Africa, I would really love to understand, and not to miss it out, how I can make that science come home. And that's why I'm framing this question to you. Do you see these open science movements bringing science home? And if not, what is it that they need to do in order to get that? And that's really the ultimate interest. Thank you.
I think that open science is an extremely powerful movement, and I think it's going to grow. It is growing very fast, and it will keep growing. And I think it's a very positive movement to make science available to more people, especially people who previously did not have access to these outlets. Nature itself, it's not open access. I don't know if it ever will be. This is up to someone much higher than me in the company. but even as a publisher, Nature Research, we are quite interested in open science. That's why we have a lot of open science journals now. There are barriers to making nature open science, but I do think that the open science movement will bring science to people, will bring it to many more people, and even with journals like Nature that are not open access, I believe that there should be schemes in place that make them available to developing countries and continents like Africa. I think it should be made available to people. I hope that answers your question. Yes, the gentleman in the back, please.
Yes, okay. First of all, I see the science communication community is now or having many perks than ever. Advances in technology, attracting artists as well, as Ms. Pakinam really pressed on this point, to attract artists and filmmakers and so on. But I think this, at the very end, attracts somehow youth like ourselves. I see a nice cinematography, so I watch this movie or short video about a scientific topic. But still, many people are alienated in this context. For instance, being a fifth-year medical student myself, I still can't convince my grandmother about the importance of her diabetes medication, for example. Okay, I believe people who has misconceptions or are raised upon, for example, any piece of knowledge, don't want to change this they don't respond to logic. I believe in this. They don't always respond to logic, and this idea brings about this idea and so on. So how do you think is a good way to communicate science to those people?
Well, first off, I think that people fear what they don't know. And people might not understand the science of things, but they know how they feel. I mean, if your grandma is suffering certain symptoms, she can feel those, even if she doesn't really trust the medicine. So one thing is to, tell her, enlighten her about, what this does in ways and in terms that she can relate to. And number two is that make it relevant to her experience, so that, there are no surefire ways to sort of convince grandmas anywhere of anything. I mean, I'm saying this from experience, but let's just try it this way. Talk to her about her experience and how this medication, for instance, could, alleviate the pain or make her have a better life quality. I mean, you know her better, so that's actually one of the things about science communication is before talking to the people, you have to know who you're talking to. And I think you know your grandma well enough to know what exactly would resonate with her. If you don't talk to her, if you don't talk down to her, and it's like this is something that you must do, or anyone does not like, not just old people, to have things forced down their throats. In this case, literally. So I would just say that try to make it relevant to her experience. Talk to her, listen to her about how she feels about her pain, about, and tell her how this is going to make the quality of her life better, and take it from there. I mean, like I said, it's experimentation mainly. You try, there are ways that work with some people that won't work with others, and the more you listen to her, the more you know sort of how to sort of broach it without offending her or without making her feel that you're forcing something upon her.
Okay,
Good luck with that.
Can I add a really small point?
I'm sorry?
Can I add a really small point to this?
Oh, sure, of course, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so on a broader aspect, on a broader base, how we include those people in the science communication messaging? Those people who don't usually believe in science and so on.
I think one of the things that we can do is that, we can, like I said, listen to them first and see what interests them, what kind of things that takes their attention. For instance, my own grandmother loves things that are fictionalized. She loves movies, she loves TV shows, she wouldn't even tune in to a talk show or things like that. So maybe if something comes on a talk show, that will get her attention, but if something is, is in another form, like, I remember there was a very old a very old TV show when it was only like 3 channels in Egypt. It was called Sir al-Ard or something, and there was this famous actor, Asla, مش عارفة اسمه إيه بصراحة. And the actor would come on, and he was sort of this household name, and everyone knew him. And I remember that this show was on in our house, even though no one was involved in agriculture. Like my mom is a biochemist, but she's not, like, no one is involved in farming. Like in my own immediate family is involved in farming or agriculture. But we used to watch this show because of the way that it was set. It was very simple back then, and I'm talking about like the late 80s or something. And this is a very simple way of communicating science. You don't have to have people sitting around the table and talk about in terms that are very technical, but you can fictionalize it. You can add humor, you can add comedy, and this will get people's attention. So it really depends on the audience, and it really depends who you're talking to, but I think it's just, you have to see first what they will respond to, and then based on that, you make your move.
I find grandmothers one of the best litmus paper for science communication. If your grandmother is interested, then you're doing something great. Yes, then you're doing something great. I don't think these issues are related to education. Some of the most well-educated people will shun traditional anti-cancer treatments, for example, for alternative medicine. It happens. It's really comes down to understanding your audience again. Why would they do this? It's the promise of alternative medicine is very attractive. It's this friendly face that can solve this problem, which it doesn't, but it's tempting. So I think it's more a challenge of what I briefly mentioned as science literacy in the community. Do people care about taking science-based decisions in their lives or not? And here, a lot of people don't. It's not part of our thinking process, but this is part of the change that we need to bring about. We need to have more convincing arguments to support our points of views that are backed by science. Like I said, alternative medicine or not doing anything is very tempting. It's a very easy choice rather than having to go through, to continue with the example of cancer, for example, having to go through chemotherapy or radiotherapy or hormonal therapy, which are all very daunting tasks, but it is what works at the end, and we have to be very very strongly convey that message while respecting that there is another powerful force that is fighting against that message, and it's, like I said, it's also an uphill battle that you will have to go through. On that one, maybe we can try a grandmother pitch. Who else is doing research? No one is doing research anymore. There's research in the batch there. Can you tell us about your research?
My research is about making a new artificial way and a new method for the blind people to make them able to see for the normal way of vision. It's like making a synthetic method of vision through some artificial devices outside the human body, then inserting this signal of the vision direct to the human brain through electromagnetic waves.
And how would you explain that to your grandmother?
Okay, she's dead.
It doesn't get you off the hook, but to his grandmother.
the big problem of the blindness and the blind people. They suffer a lot in their life. So me and my partner at the research, we have thought to make a device that help them and make them enabled to see like normal people. This device substitutes the normal organs, like the eye and the organs in the human body that make us see. They make the same function, and then send it to the body so that the blind person can see.
I like that. I like that. Thank you.
What size is this?
The size it's very small. It's like not bigger than suitcase.
Suitcase.
Yes, the size of the whole device. It's not single device, like multiple devices connected to each other.
Thank you. I probably saw your presentation.
Yes, the last.
But not this one.
Yes, the last one.
Oh, last edition he presented it on the exhibition.
Oh, I see. So that's why you're familiar with it. Well, I would love to stay and listen to more of these pitches, but I think we are out of time. So I would just apologize for going a little over time. And I would like to thank everyone who came in this morning.
Yeah,
It was
thank
a
you guys
pleasure
for waking
having
up
you.
so early and being a great audience.
And just a very quick announcement that the keynote speech of Dr. Sharif Delaware, the former UN expert economist, will be starting now in the Great Hall. So if you want to go to that, you might need to head there right away. Thank you very much.